Kia ora, decultivists. If you're here to learn more about coercive control and cultic harm, we've got something for you. Decal Talks is a series featuring the best sessions from our impactful 2024 Decal Conference in Aotearoa, New Zealand, with 40 international speakers. As the conference director, I'm excited to bring you powerful survivor stories, expert insights, and discussions on recovery, advocacy, and justice. Check out our website, decal.net, where you can already register your interest for the next Decal Conference in 2026. Tune in on all podcast platforms and let's raise cult awareness together.
Hello and welcome to the Cult Vault Podcast, your dedicated podcast for uncovering the darkest corners of cults and coercive control. I'm your host, Kacey, and I want to start by thanking each and every one of you for tuning in. Your support fuels our deep dives into these critical issues. Before we get started, a word of caution. Today's episode may contain discussions on abuse, including graphic descriptions of abuse and covers a variety of human rights violations that may be triggering for some listeners. Please consider this as a trigger warning and proceed with caution. I'm thrilled to announce that I'll be appearing at CrimeCon UK in London on the 7th and 8th of June 2025, and again in Manchester on the 27th of September 2025. Join me and a host of world-leading experts, advocates and noisemakers at the heart of the true crime community. This is the UK's biggest true crime event, and you won't want to miss it. Use the code CULT, C-U-L-T, for 10% off your tickets. And remember, there are flexible tickets and payment plans available to accommodate everyone. This incredible event is sponsored by True Crime, and it's always my favourite weekend of the year. I hope to see some of you there. And for those who want even more from the Cult Vault podcast, you can access early, ad-free content by supporting me at patreon.com/thecultvault, where every pledge not only gives you exclusive access, but also directly supports the continuation of this work. Thank you again for your support and your listenership. Now, let's unlock the vault. Hello, listeners, and welcome back to another episode of the Cult Vault podcast. I'm your host, Kacey, and I'm so excited to be diving into a group that I researched and did a deep dive on, but have never done a public episode with a guest before. So we are going to be talking about the Source family. I don't know if all of the listeners outside of Patreon will have heard of this group. Maybe you have. Let us know if that's the case, but I'm so excited to welcome Wendy Baker. Hi, Wendy.
Hi there. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you so much for joining us and for letting me read a copy of your memoir, My Name Was Mushroom, which is what we are going to be talking all about today. That title, I imagine for some people that aren't familiar with the Source family, is a very peculiar title for a book.
Yes, it is. But it's true. My name was Mushroom. So it seemed appropriate.
And I'm really looking forward to going into all of the reasons why somebody would go from having the name Wendy to having the name Mushroom. So I suppose we should start by asking you to introduce yourself to the listeners.
Okay. Well, my name's Wendy Baker. I'm 67 years old today. No, it's not my birthday. I just mean I'm 67. I have 3 children. One of my oldest born in the Source family, at just prior to turning 17. I have 4 grandsons that are all teenagers now. I've been married for 47 years. I live in Malibu, California. I lead a pretty much, I don't know if it's normal life, but I, have led a completely different life after the commune. And I'm guessing that's probably in a nutshell.
Yeah, there's lots of things inside that nutshell to unpack today. And I know that we won't get through it all in the hour or so that we have, but we're going to give it a good try.
Okay.
So in this work on the podcast that I do, there's often talk of the counterculture movement of the 1960s in certain parts of America. And I talk a lot about how a lot of groups that are discussed on this show came up at that time on certain beaches, on certain stretches of, California and LA. And I talk about it through research I find online. But you're here today as somebody that was a child, a teenager growing up in those times. So I would just love for you to explain to the listeners what that was really like being around like Haight-Ashbury and all of those areas just as a child, as a teenager, like in those years.
Well, to me, it was normal. I grew up in Hollywood, California. And, that was when the love-ins were happening and the hippie movement, lots of drugs, lots of sex, rock and roll. It was great times. It was, young children were involved with that, even the adults, even the grandparents. Everybody was smoking marijuana. It was just a very different time. And education was secondary. It wasn't a priority, in those times. And everybody was protesting against Vietnam, the war. I actually was one of them. And, it was just, it was a crazy time. It was very interesting time to grow up, I think. And that might have something to do with why I was able to leave home and join a commune at the young age that I did.
It's wild to think of children hitchhiking and being picked up and just moving around America that way, because it's quite a thing now. If you see somebody with their thumbs sticking out on the side of the highway or the side of the motorway, I think people are a bit like, oh, you wouldn't pick a stranger up. But that's how you moved around a lot of the time in your memoir when you were younger.
That is exactly how I moved around. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And everybody was hitchhiking. It was just we hitchhiked all the way to San Francisco. I've to Big Sur, and then of course all over Laurel Canyon, which I don't know if you're aware of. Listeners know about Laurel Canyon, but it was like the happening place for the hippies and the music industry. I used to get picked up by Bob Dylan, Crosby, David Crosby, Carole King. You name it, I've got picked up by them hitchhiking.
Wild. And of course, everything with Charles Manson was happening around Laurel Canyon.
It happened pretty much. Yeah, it happened pretty much when I was part of that whole. Actually, Jim Baker, who was the leader of the commune, was friends with Sharon Tate, and we actually went and visited her before she was killed, and she was pregnant. And I remember how sweet she was and, all of that. And then that happened and we were just completely stunned. That just shocked everybody, shocked our world.
Is wild. It had the same sorts of feelings as a lot of the Manson family moved from kind of communal house to communal house around that part of America at the time. And a lot of your story where you were moving sort of from home to home had that same type of vibe. Is that something that you think was normal for everybody, or just you just sort of shared small elements of your group and the Manson family in terms of cohabitation?
I really don't relate our group at all to them in any way. We did move around, but we also, had homes to live in, beautiful homes. I never ever correlated me with the Manson group at all. I really don't even know very much about them, to be honest. But ours was a positive, loving environment, and I don't know what that group was, but I don't get the feeling that it was positive and loving. Yeah.
No, not particularly. Not particularly at all. And they kind of stayed in like a Western film set type of place, which is a very far cry from some of the beautiful homes that the Source family lived in, in its many years of being around. So I suppose that leads us really nicely into talking about how you first met James Edward Baker, Jim Baker, your first impressions of him, and how you were really swept up into this charismatic movement that he created. Well, I suppose he hadn't created it when you first met him, really.
Right, right. When I first met him, I was 12, and I was dating Bart Baker, which is his son. And he just said, we're going to go meet my dad. He owns this restaurant called The Source. It's a vegetarian restaurant, and don't be scared by him because he's a big guy. And, and I just thought, oh, okay, that's fine. I mean, I know nothing. So I walk in and, oh my God, he was, magnetic. I was just drawn to him. Like, he was beautiful. He was big, tall, 6'5.5", and just had the most loving relationship with Bart. And we had lunch with them, and that was my first meeting him.
Of a wild backstory to Jim Baker's kind of past before starting the Source family. He auditioned for the role of Tarzan, I believe. I've done some reading about in my research, and there was a lot of other stuff that happened around him before he opened that restaurant. And I just wondered if you could give the listeners a bit of an idea of who he was before he became Father Yod.
Well, I know that he was a war hero. He saved unbelievable amount of lives in Japan. He was a weightlifter. He became a yogi. He followed Yogi Bhajan, became a Sikh. He was married to Bart's mom for 15 years. They had 3 boys named Bo, Bart, and Ben. All their births were natural childbirths, which did not take place in those days. He was a naturalist, a nutrition fanatic, ate perfectly, very much into health. And he got a divorce from his wife, Elaine, because he was a womanizer. And he kept having these affairs. He also, killed 2 men. And he was prosecuted. The first one, he was let off. It was in self-defense. And the second one took about 1.5 years to prove that it was also self-defense. And it was over a girl, a woman who was an actress. And he killed her husband, who was in a jealous rage and came after him, and his wife, Elaine. And I guess Elaine had just had it, and she just said, I can't do this anymore. And so she got a divorce. And that's when he decided to build the Source restaurant. I think it was maybe the vegetarian health food restaurant in LA. And all the celebrities and musicians and everybody ate there. I mean, everybody was intrigued by being a vegetarian. So, background. He was a disciple of Yogi Bhajan, and that's where he learned a lot of the spirituality and the teachings that we practice in the commune. So that's kind of the beginning of him.
Reading about how the Source restaurant was the place to be on the Strip. There was no other place like it. All the celebrities ate there. It was like a really beautiful spot that he'd created. And then eventually, over time, more and more people that just wanted to be around Jim Baker would move their caravans sort of behind the restaurant. Now, I don't know if the research is accurate, but you lived through this. So I would love to hear from your perspective how that transformed from being the Source restaurant to the Source family.
Well, I actually started hanging out at the Source before it became the Source family. And it was just a cool place to be. I used to waitress after school, hang out with Jim Baker, and he was called Jim Baker at that time. And people just kept, coming there and just wanting to work there and be there. And it was like a family that worked there. Everybody was so friendly, and everybody had the same mindset. Everybody was very involved with meditation and yoga and eating healthy. And just that whole genre. So then one day, one of the servers said, "Why don't you start your own, like spiritual commune?" And he said, "Yeah, why don't I?" So really, it just started like just piece by piece, one step at a time. And actually, my sister joined the commune before me. My mom let her go and join. She would not let me. I wanted to. And then there were like 3 or 4 other girls just a year older than me that were able to join. And so before you knew it, about 40 of us. And those 40 pretty much stayed with the whole thing till it ended. But it was like a progress. It was a work in progress. It wasn't premeditated. It wasn't designed we're going to do this, and that. It really kind of just evolved. And we just kind of made a lot of mistakes along the way and then just created this beautiful family. Before we knew it, we had 144 people. And so that's when he decided we need to get a big house. We all need to live together. That's when I joined, pretty much committedly. I was still in school and I was not allowed to participate in the Source family in any way. But people heard it.
Gosh, it's so strange to hear somebody that lived through it explain it after reading so much about it from, journalists who weren't there and from, books about, different people that they weren't there. And so this is really insightful, and I'm just marveling in all of this perspective that you're giving us today.
Now, my book, just to throw it out there, I wrote it through the eyes of a teenager. So my experience in the Source family is going to be far different than the ones that came into the family at 20, 21, 30. They have a different experience, and I don't want to negate their experience because it was real and true. But the way I saw things and the way I experienced it is what I wrote my book about. It's coming from my eyes.
So you joined officially when Jim Baker said, we're going to all move into a communal home. I'd love you to describe that home for us and at what point you were given your name Mushroom.
Okay, so the home was by the Griffith Park area. They call it Las Villas. It was a mansion. It was 3 stories. It had an attic, which we also used for people to, sleep at. It had a guest house. It had a garage and another place above the garage. It had a swimming pool. It had gates to go in. It was very secured, a beautiful lawn out front, plenty of room for everybody to have space. I mean, we didn't have our own bedrooms, but some people did. Some, I would say about 10 people had their own bedrooms. They were married with child or whatnot, so they got their own bedrooms. There was a children's room where all the children slept and did their schooling because there were, several children there as well. And I moved in pretty quickly in May of just leaving 10th grade. So I was 14 at the time. And then I had just turned 15 in June. So, yeah. And I stayed there all summer. That's kind of when I left home and never went back home.
Was your mum's reaction to you leaving completely, not just hanging out at the restaurant and coming home, or not just going off on road trips and visiting San Francisco and then coming back again? You actually left and you didn't go back. What was your mum's reaction?
Well, before I left, she did everything. She knew I wanted to go. And, I was going to the Source restaurant all the time after school. And so she did everything in her power to convince me not to go. She had my aunt come over and try to, convince me, my friends. It just didn't work. So she was livid. She was very, very upset. And eventually in the book, it tells you what she did. And I don't really know if I should be giving that away because I really want people to read the book.
Yeah.
But it was pretty gnarly what she did to me. And it didn't turn out, I think, the way she was hoping. Who would have thought, right? I mean, I would not have thought that. So you have to read the book to find out what happened, what she did to me to not allow me to join.
I think it's good to leave a little bit of mystery around the book, because I agree that listeners should definitely go and pick up a copy of My Name Was Mushroom, because before I hit the record button, I said to you, Wendy, what a roller coaster of a memoir. Oh my goodness. So much happens in that book, and it's not particularly long. It's not a long memoir. Some memoirs are really hefty, but it wasn't that long, and so much happened. And I was just, at one point you said, and at this point my daughter was 1, and I was like, what? How has all of that happened since she was born? It was wild. So that's another reason why listeners should go and pick up a copy of My Name Was Mushroom, just to find out why.
It all happened within 5 years, 5 or 6 years. That's it. But then my life became boring.
It's a roller coaster, and that's all I can really say. And when you moved in to the mansion, at what point during the Source family's journey was this? Was this before Jim Baker changed his name? Is this before you changed what you were wearing? You had a name change. And what were the kind of rules that Jim Baker was encouraging you to live by if you were in the commune?
So, first of all, the house was called the Mother House. We named it. So that's one thing. One of the rules was that you wear white. Everybody wore only white. And so I was wearing white in high school at 14 years old at school. So I stood out like a sore thumb when everyone was wearing see-through tops and bell bottoms and beads and feathers. Secondly, my first name was Lila. He gave that to me. That lasted all but 2 weeks. I'm the only in the Source family that had 4 names. My second name for probably a good year was Nirvana. So a lot of people in the family at the beginning know me as Nirvana. And then my third name was when I was in Hawaii, in Maui, and we hiked. He came to visit me and whatever family members that were there at that time. And we would hike to this waterfall in Maui, and we decided to eat mushrooms that day. There was probably about 8 of us. So I ate the mushrooms, and I'm not a drug person, and I don't take drugs. I never really have. So I didn't think what the harm was to eat some mushrooms with my leader of the commune, who I trusted with my life. So I ate some mushrooms, and oh my God, I must have put on some performance. And that's when I got the name Mushroom. So that became my name. And he wanted me to have a different name than Nirvana because I was a runaway and they were looking for me. So no one's going to know. They're going to ask, do you guys know where Nirvana is? They would know. But if they say, do you know where Mushroom is? Nobody would even understand. Because you have to understand, the family members didn't even know what I had been through. And that was for protection for them. So it was really just between myself. At the time, his name changed to Father Yod and a couple of his women. And that's it. That's all who knew. And Starman, he knew. So that's how the names happened. So then my name was Mushroom for, a good 3 years. But then the last year of me being in the Source, my name was Heartstar. And so that name is also a name that people know me by, is Heartstar. But I decided to name the book, my name was Mushroom, because so much happened in the mushroom stage, if that
Yeah.
makes sense to you at all. Yeah.
It absolutely does. It absolutely does. And there's a few things you touched on in that kind of anecdote about being given the name mushroom that I think might be really important to unpack for the listeners. You mentioned Starman, so I think for context, people might be like, "Who is that?" And also, obviously, there's Hawaii that in my mind of the Source family kind of came after the mother house. So of course this is just my understanding of it, and you'll know a lot better. And we've already mentioned that the family really moved around a lot, and stayed in all of these different places. So um who was Starman? And how did you meet? And yeah, and how what were the expectations of living in the mother house as part of the commune?
So I met Starman when I was 14. He was working, I met him at a Grateful Dead concert. And he was working.
Grateful Dead. Why is it always the Grateful?
I don't know, but they were very popular. Everyone was a Deadhead. What can I say? So I went there with my sister and Michelle and Nancy, which who also joined the family. And we all met these four guys. We met Starman's name was James, and we met Bobby, Roy, and Patrick. Okay. So that's where I first met him. And he had beautiful green eyes. He was just a beautiful man, and he was so funny and just so interesting. He was 7 years older than me. But I didn't really start a relationship with him until I moved to the mother house. And then at that point, we started having a relationship. And then it was serious. I pretty much was with Starman the entire time in the family. He was a very nice guy, a lot of fun, very special person. And I was with him. I was not one of the cult members that moved around sexually or like with other men and stuff. Many of the women did. I did not. I pretty much stayed with them the entire time until the very end. And then what was the other question? Like what?
Yeah, life in the mother house. What were the expectation? Because you mentioned that everyone wore white. And I recall from reading your book that just there were certain things that were expected of you if you were staying in the house. Your diet, everybody was vegetarian, and just painting the picture of what it was like to live in this mansion together.
Well, it was beautiful. So you had to be a vegetarian, of course. You can't cut your hair, so your hair is long. You had to we meditated every morning at 4:30 as a group. You had to be there on time. If you wanted to join the family, you had to do a diet called the Yodhe Vahe diet, which was a very strict diet, and it was for 30 days. And once you were able to complete that diet, then that was your initiation. Then you could be a permanent member of the Source family. There was a lot of juice fasting going on. He was a real firm believer in juice fasting for healing and for eliminating poisons and bad stuff in your body. What else? The rules were, to follow the rules, basically we got up every morning super early. There was no negativity spoken. You were not supposed to have an ego. It was very interesting. I was young enough that I could mold into all of that pretty easily. But these older people, now that I'm looking back, I'm like, how were they able to change their thoughts and their ways? Because it was pretty dramatic, as far as I'm concerned. It was a beautiful place to live. There's a lot of music going on. We had our own musicians, a lot of singing. We had some beautiful singers in the family. Jim Baker's wife, Robin, who later became Aom, or some people called her Mother. She was always related to his mother in the family. The most beautiful singer I have ever heard. And there was another guy named Aladdin in the family. And the two of them would sing together, and we had our own music. It was like being in heaven. It was so beautiful. So there's a lot of happy times.
And there's talk in your book of how there were some professional or famous musicians that had moved in, and so it wasn't just people, messing about with instruments. They all really could play, so it was like a true jamming session.
Yeah, we had a band. We formed a band. Music was very big in our family. Arlick, his name was Arlick in the family. I don't know what his real name is, but he was part of the Seeds, which was a big group in the 60s. And Patrick was about to travel with another band. His name was Sunflower in the family. And a lot of members were engineers, editors, so they knew how to make albums and record. Well, James Starman was one of them. And there's a lot of just incredible musicians and singers. Oh, and then Lovely was the daughter of Andre Previn, and she was a violinist, and she was big in our music world as well. I'm trying to remember who else, because I was not up with all the names, but several. You know what I mean? I was kind of young and I really didn't give a shit. I was like, okay, well, whoever you are, that's fine. You're here now. Let's just start now.
Yeah, especially if somebody joins and it's not like, it is today when you can just Google a picture of somebody and know what they look like or see what films they've been in or see what music they've produced. And you get introduced to somebody that has a well-known famous name, but they're now called something completely different. Like,
Right.
here's Waterfall, and you're like, oh, nice to meet.
Right. Well, I've actually had people contacting my assistant saying, Opti, I knew Mushroom, but I didn't know Wendy Baker. And then they would tell her we call it Piscean name. I don't know them by that name. So I'm like, you have to find out what the name was in the family. Then I will be able to put a face to it. So it's interesting. Yeah.
And it's interesting that Jim Baker changed your name again so that you couldn't be tracked down by authorities after your mum was, she was looking for you or you were registered as a missing person. And it was only from your book, it was only you and Jim Baker that knew about that. So,
well, there's a few people that knew. Starman knew. Well, he didn't know every detail of what Jim Baker was going to do, but he knew that I was, a runaway fugitive and all of that. A couple people knew, and my sister knew. She was in the Source family with me. So I'd say about 5 people knew.
right. And there was this element of kind of being in the present and not talking about the past. And that fits in a lot with the kind of belief system of the Source family. And you mentioned your Piscean name. So for listeners who might not kind of be aware of the Source family, what was the belief system and how did it really feed into the times? There was a lot of spirituality happening. There was a lot of New Age stuff happening. And the Source family is like a perfect example of the age of Aquarius, really.
Which, yeah. Well, basically, the Pisceans are all the people in the Maya. And the Maya was like everybody else but us. And basically, we were the chosen few. A lot of fear stuff going on. The chosen few that were going to survive September 2001 when the world was going to fall apart. And so, did I believe that? Not really. No. But that was the talk. So we were just so if you left the Source family, basically they would say, oh, you're going back into the Maya, meaning everybody else. Or, oh, and the Piscean would be that you wear normal clothing, that you're no longer a vegetarian, and that you follow the government rules and that you pay taxes and that's what Piscean is.
This is so interesting to hear all of this from your point of view. So you're in the mother house. You've met Starman. You two are in a relationship together. There's like a really rapid change of lifestyle that you settle into because you're like a chameleon. You're a younger person, so you can just kind of like change with the rapid changing of the
Right.
environment. What comes after the mother house and the music and and the communal living there?
Well, leaving out a lot of stuff that I went through because a lot happened to me. But basically, Jim Baker or at that point, he was Father Yod. He changed his name too, from Jim Baker, Father Yod to Yehoah. He decided that we're going to sell the Source restaurant and we're all going to find some land in Hawaii and we're going to live peacefully and quietly and do what we want to do in Hawaii. So he said, I was already there, but he said, sent people to look for land and look for a place to settle. And we did. And then not everybody, but some people moved over to Hawaii. They still had a cruise stay at the Source when they sold it. And that was our transition. So it was interesting. Everybody flying in the airport wearing white, with children and long hair. And, everybody looked vibrant and healthy and beautiful. And I'm sure we blew the minds of just about anyone that watched us. Yeah.
There's a history of Hawaii as a kind of um as a kind of nation. I don't know, like as a kind of community. They don't always welcome groups
Right.
of new people. This has cropped up quite a lot, different groups heading into Hawaii. I didn't realize until I read your book that there was a bit of confusion among the residents and the locals about who you were and who some other people were. And so you got persecuted wrongly. And I didn't know that until reading your book. So if you kind of go back to that time, what's your recollection of going to Hawaii and the locals being not too happy with your community moving in?
So when we went to Maui, it was fine. They accepted us. Everybody there was hippie and in the same thing. But when we moved to Kauai, they misjudged us as being the beach people. And the beach people was a communal group that took over this beautiful beach in Kauai, and they were on major drugs, and they were running around naked and leaving garbage and, just being very unruly and in neighborhoods where families lived. And they thought that we were part of that because, we're a commune and we're all white, but we weren't. And take off the island, they were, shooting guns at us. They were not allowing us to buy fish at the fish market, not allowing us to sell our fish that we would, go and get. And yeah, it was horrible. Kauai is not my favorite place. I do not have good memories of Kauai.
It's really interesting to think about Kauai and other groups that tried to move in because they just run people out.
Yeah.
If a group of people show up and they are not local to the area, then the island will not let them stay.
They actually paid for us for over 150 people to fly and get out of there. They literally did that. Can you believe it?
Well, they were serious about not having people stay. Wow, that's fascinating to me. But that's not where the Source family's life in Hawaii ends. You kind of have ties there and you shift backwards and forwards in your own story. And it's really hard for me to ask you to talk us through everything because you shift around so much. But
Right.
at one point you do have a daughter. A daughter is born.
Yes. So when I'm in Maui, I got pregnant, and I had her there, and Jim Baker delivered her, and we had we had a ranch style house on the property, and actually I lived in a tree house with Starman until I gave birth. And yeah, it was interesting. And I had witnessed many births because people were having babies, quite a bit in the family. That was the thing, was to procreate, have children, raise them in this certain environment. And I had my little Stardust, and she was yeah, it was interesting to be a mom that young. I had a lot to learn.
I was a mum at 26, and I still feel like, I had to. I don't know if you would ever feel like you knew enough to have kids. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes, it does. I mean, at least I was smart enough to reach out and figure things out, and I didn't give up, and I wasn't, I was going to try to do my very best. And I've always felt that way. So, I mean, I took classes when joined the Maya and the Piscean world. I took a lot of classes and learned, and, I had a lot of catching up to do, but it worked out. I'm guessing Stardust would say that I was a pretty good mom.
Was the name given by Jim Baker to your daughter?
Yes.
Is that right? So
Yeah.
when you moved into the Piscean world, did she keep that name?
So she was Stardust all the way up until she joined high school. And, my daughter, was a cheerleader, a dancer, a champion swimmer, a very good student, an honor student. And she says, Mom, this name, it just doesn't fit me. I've got to change it. So before she went to high school, I gave her a middle name of Jamie. So she used her name Jamie when she went to high school. So a lot of people in Malibu still say, "Oh, how's Stardust?" They don't see her as Jamie. And then there's the high schoolers that know her as Jamie and knew that her name was Stardust. And then, if she got stopped by a police for a ticket and that's on her license, they'd say, "Your parents are from the 70s, right?" She goes, "Right." So it really legally is her name, but she goes by Jamie now.
That's so funny. Oh my
I know.
gosh. That's so funny. At least they get it, And she doesn't have to explain herself every time she gets stopped by somebody or has to go through an airport.
Well, when she became a teacher, where she is right now, and she had to fill out her application and all of that, go through the vetting process, they said, "Your name is Stardust." She had to really explain that in her background check. It was she said it was a little difficult.
You have your daughter, and it's very communal between the mums and the babies. It's kind of like a group rearing.
Um, it could be, and many of them it was. For me, I was hands-on to my daughter. I watched a lot of children. I nursed a lot of them, but I didn't put my daughter into the midst of, here, take her. And I went off and did something. I was a hands-on mom.
Yeah. Yeah. You talk about that a lot actually in your book, when you'd go for a swim and she'd be with you
On my back.
on your back.
Yeah.
Imagery. Oh my gosh.
Oh, and she ended up being a champion swimmer. Go figure.
And you have this wild first year of your daughter's life, really moving around, and stuff with the Source family starts to change. There's talk of maybe disbanding the group, maybe the group stays together, maybe the group needs a new direction. Can you talk us through what those moments were like, the difficulty in shifting around and not knowing where you were going to be or where you were going to be staying from one day to the next?
It was very difficult. And to be honest, traumatizing. I was very insecure, really emotionally going through it at that time. My only stability really was Starman. Just knowing that he was there taking care of me, if you could call it that. But yeah, it was, we really didn't even think about the group until Jim Baker passed away. Up until then, we were 100% devoted in being together as a group. And how that took place, it was gradual. Just a lot of uncertainty, and it just was not going to work out because he was no longer the leader. And I think it for him.
Yeah, yeah. I've read in some newspaper articles, journal articles, that the day that Jim Baker died, it was intentional because he'd had enough of being the leader of this group. I think even from reading your book, there's a way you could interpret it that way. But of course, the way that you experienced it was different. So for people listening that don't know what happened to Jim Baker, could you talk us through the days that he fell on the beach?
Well, so that was the worst day of my life, I have to say, because I truly was in love with him, as a father. It's a debate. Did he do that intentionally or not? I don't think he did it intentionally, but I do think that he took a risk that most likely was not going to be a good outcome. So he's a hang glider, and he's never been hang gliding before. But some of the family members took up hang gliding. So he wanted to do it. I think it was restless, and he loved change, obviously, because all we did was change. And he used to say, change is the only constant thing in the universe. And I love what saved me through a lot. So the hang glider got stuck in a turbulent wind, and he landed in a tree in Makapuu Beach. And they found him there, hanging, from the hang glider. And they were able to get him down, and he was with his 12 women at that time. And so they sped down the mountain in their cars and found him there. And they took him home. He was in horrible pain, and he did not believe in going to the hospital or doctors. So, they didn't tell us, the rest of the group, right away. And basically, he suffered greatly, like more than any human being should. And he died, and they were shocked. Well, I mean, why they would not get him help from a doctor or go to the hospital and find out, what was going on is beyond me. Nobody seemed to be able to put it. There was a small group, about 2 or 3 women, that told me and everybody else that these other women to let him go to the hospital. But they kept saying, but your teachings say don't do that. But then I'm only 17, 18 at that point. And I'm like, well, how do you know he didn't break a bone? He said you can go to the hospital if you break a bone. But how do you know if you don't go to the hospital to find out? So there's a lot of strange questions. Ultimately, I guess it was his plan. I guess it was the plan, God's plan, if you want to say. But he passed away, of 9 hours of horrible pain. I don't get it. I still today don't get how that all came down. And they all have great comebacks and answers for it. But me as a young teenager, I don't get it.
Yeah, it's really quite something to think about, the teachings that Jim Baker ingrained in over so many years, to then go back on those, obviously, when he was in significant pain and discomfort, and he was saying, I need a hospital. But his teachings were, they were so impactful on those that followed him that they were like, but we don't do that. That's not what we do. It's just, those types of things, they make my knees and elbows go, when you think about somebody in that amount of pain. And the way you describe it in your book as well, it had me kind of like my butt cheeks clenched, thinking about somebody begging for, to be helped and then just kind of laying there not being helped by the people, the some of the people that loved him most in the world, which is again another thing that boggles my mind. So this kind of was the start of the end for the Source family after Jim Baker's death. There was like an attempt, I think, to continue, but it didn't really. People just kind of fizzled out after a while. Would you say that's kind of how it happened? Not a formal disbanding, but
it took a good year. But there's a few people that left right away, but a lot of us stayed. Most of us stayed, and we followed, the council women to Oahu, and that's where we were. We lived there for a good long time. That was probably the longest we've lived in one place, like 2 years. Yeah, it just wasn't working out. The women were fighting amongst each other. There was no good leadership. It just wasn't the same. And there was not a lot of money. And so there was, the men weren't able to get jobs, go out work because they had long beards and long hair and they wore robes. I mean, it was ridiculous. But yeah, it just slowly disbanded and it was sad, but we all have a connection though. I mean, if ever I see any of my brothers or sisters, so I call them that, from the Source family, we love each other. We've been through a lot together. There's a core group that stuck it out from the beginning to the end. I'm talking about those people, not the ones that left early or came in for a year and left. They didn't really give it what we all gave it. So yeah, it was just a whole nother thing. And then I realized, I'm 18 years old, I'm going to be 19 and I want to go back. I want to be a Piscean. And I want to go to school and get an education and all the things that I probably should have done, but I didn't because that was just not my path. And that's what I chose to do. But the way I did it wasn't exactly the greatest. But it was my mentality at the time, and that's what I did.
Was almost like making the best of a really tough situation.
Yeah.
And anybody that's read the book or goes on to read the book will understand what that means kind of towards the tail end of the memoir. And I don't want to give that away either, but I will just say that you go full circle, and that's the most bizarre thing. You start off at one point and you end up in that same point, and you did that kind of 6-year mad journey in the middle.
It was all a big dream. I don't know. It's something inside of me. I had to do this. Like, I think a lot of it had to do with upbringing in my home environment. I did not want to grow up like that. And it was not a good environment. It was a very hostile home, not physically abusive, but more emotionally. And I just saw that there's got to be something better for me, and I went for it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's the way I see it. If I had a different home environment, I'm not sure I would have done that.
Yeah, or just even living in a different part of history. You mentioned at the start that, the lifestyle that children and teenagers were living in that time might have fed into, your journey through the Source family. So, people always say, well, not people, Chris Shelton specifically, who's an ex-Scientologist and a fantastic content creator. He also said, he always says there's no point living in hypotheticals. I think it's interesting to reflect on those things because there are usually 2 or 3 things that, result in a person being attracted to something like the Source family. And when we are talking about other groups on the show, typically, more destructive groups, groups that have significantly harmed other people. And I know that wasn't your experience, and it's a very different change of pace for me to interview somebody on the show that's had a largely positive experience of their group. You use the word cult in your book, and you've used it here today as well. And I would just like to know, why you think other people consider the source family a cult, and why you sometimes use that word yourself despite having an overall positive experience of the source family.
I'll tell you, because I think we were brainwashed, and I think we were sleep deprived, hungry, and I don't think that we had enough to make smart decisions. And that part of it makes it to me like a cult. You could leave anytime you want, but it wasn't easy. It was like, oh, you're going to go out into, there was like a lot of mental bashing, about it. So that's why there's the cult aspect of it, but it's also commune because it's a group of people living together, trying to live a lifestyle. So it wasn't a negative cult, but there was something about it. That's, and by the way, I didn't want to use the word cult. I really want to keep it commune. Not that there's a whole lot of difference, because I felt really like it was a family and a commune. Yeah.
That's such a hard thing to weigh up, isn't it? There's the communal aspect of living, and having a family that you've chosen and loving each other and supporting each other, especially through really hard times like moving all the time and, having a child when you're so young yourself. All of these things that your chosen family helps you through. And then there's the other side of it with the diet restriction and, wearing certain clothes and using certain language and having a new name and then another new name. So it's hard to not throw the baby out with the bathwater when you leave a group, and you don't want to associate yourself with all of the things that happened if you had an overall negative experience. But sometimes there are good parts, and people do hold on to those. And it's hard to go through that process of weighing up, like, what do we keep? What do we throw away? But with your experience, it's so different, which is why it was so bizarre for me to read your book about the Source family after everything I'd read. And then your perspective was so different.
Well, some people had a bad experience. Some people did go through that. They had some things happen, but I didn't. And then a lot of people still kind of identify themselves as a member of the Source family. Like, they're still living that way. They still let their hair grow. They don't wear makeup. They wear these flowy dresses, and the men still have beards. There's a good group of them that have not let go. But then I would say about 80% of us have let go. And we just took the positive, what we wanted to incorporate into our lifestyle, we took. And that's kind of what I did.
And this is probably like the maddest part of your story. And I don't know how, because there's so much that happens. But you mentioned that you met James Edward Baker through dating his son Bart when you were 12 years old?
Yes.
And who are you married to now?
So I'm married to Bart.
Wild. I was like, oh, my last name's Baker and Wendy Baker. And I was like, oh my gosh, James Edward Baker. So I kind of already knew, and you have acknowledgements at the start of your book. So I kind of already knew that you must marry somebody in the family. But it's right. Like, when I said you go full circle, it's, you really go full circle. That's how you met James Edward Baker, and that's and you married his son, which is just wild.
I know. He's amazing. Oh my God, he's so amazing. It's been the best, incredible marriage and life that I could imagine. Like, he's a lot like his dad in some ways, but he's the good part. He's not a womanizer or anything like that. He's incredible.
And In the acknowledgements, you say that he was really the person that encouraged you to write this book and to put it out into the world. What has the reception been like of your book to wider audiences, but also to those that you call your brothers and sisters?
Well, I interviewed a lot of them for the book because, I was so young and I needed help with the timelines and everything. Everybody's been very supportive. Everybody likes it. I haven't heard one negative thought from a source member. And in the world, oh my God, like it's amazing how many people want to read my book. It's incredible. The world I think is taking my book very positively, and lots of questions, lots and lots of questions. When I do book signings, I just get inundated with these questions about sex and, the spiritual stuff and all of that. They want to know the skinny of all that. Another outcome is that I have a group of people trying to make a movie about my book, but the movie could be a love story between me and Bart. It's going to be, of course, about the commune, but they told me that they're actually, the writer is just about finished with the script, that she wants it to be a love story. So a lot of positive stuff have come out, and my children, they're like, "Oh my God, Mom, what you did what?" And my son, especially, he's like, "And you made me go to school every day, and you never let me ditch school once, and you made me go to college." He really reacted. He was just like, and you didn't even do those things, and I didn't. Yeah, I never told my children what I did, and every was blown away. All three of them had a different reaction, but mostly positive, but totally shocked.
So it's like that's when the thought terminating cliches come out, isn't it? It was a different time, or do as I say, not as I do. Those quips that parents say, and you're like, "But Mom."
I know. I mean, can you imagine me telling my kids, the stuff I did? I mean, my kids, they were brought up very conservative, normal. They went to high school, they went to college, they all have lots of education. And yeah, it was shocking to them, just shocking.
And now you've got 4 grandchildren as well.
They're amazing too. Yeah, I have 4. They're all teenagers. I know.
I was saying before we hit record that when you read a person's memoir, your journey starts at, unless it's somebody you know personally, you start your journey with them at the start of the book, and then wherever they are at the end of the book is kind of where you leave them. So it was strange for me to sit down with you today as a 67-year-old woman that has 4 grandchildren, not as like a, young 20-something-year-old that has moved into the Piscean world and is just kind of fumbling her way through everything. So yeah, it's just amazing to talk to you today and to hear your version of events on the Source family. First person perspective, primary source, if you might say that, primary source of the Source family, and just to hear about your experiences in the book My Name Was Mushroom. It's a great read. I didn't know what to expect, but it certainly wasn't that, and I can't recommend it enough to listeners. I'm going to put the links in the episode description for everybody to have a listen. And if you have read the book or you do read the book, get in touch, cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com, because I always love to talk to listeners about their reaction to a memoir that I've read or a book that I've read. So please reach out if you do go on to read it. And I guess my next and last question, Wendy, is what's next? Are you going to write another book, or are you going to be focusing on this movie? What comes next?
Well, I picked up the movie because I'm going to be very involved with that. But my husband and I have thought about writing Jim Baker's memoir, because he has all the material from his childhood on up. He's an interesting character in himself. And so we're really contemplating doing that. That's what I've been.
I mean, you could write a story just even before the Source family with all of its stuff around, you know, the murder through self-defense convictions, the Tarzan stuff, Yogi Bhajan. There's so much stuff that you could write about. He was a hero, of course. Yeah. Oh my gosh, there is a lot of material there. Maybe that might be a bit of a longer, a longer biography than My Name Was Mushroom. That might be one of those lengthy ones, you know, if you try and fit everything in.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Wendy, and for letting me talk to you all about your experiences and reading a copy of your book. It's been so wonderful to chat, and I really appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.